Welcome to Compass. Great to have you here with us this morning. Welcome to the end of spring break week. Thursday night was a total ghost town because so many people were out camping or skiing, but I'm glad you're back. And it's St. Patrick's Day. Did you guys remember that? You did. You're in green. I did not remember. Church is sanctuary. There's absolutely no pinching. It goes on until we leave the building, so knock it off if you're thinking about it. Hey, really great to have you here. So you heard we're in week 2 of this parenting series, and we'll wrap that up next week and then move on to our next series, and then we're into Easter. Things are moving quick, but we have a lot to cover today, so let me just jump right in and let's start talking. And let's start with this premise. Parenting. Parenting is hard, right? Like, you notice how they have miracle diets, right? And they have miracle cures for certain things. But no one's really offering a miracle solution to raising children. Lots of books with advice on parenting, but no easy way about it, right? Parenting is just hard. Jim Gaffigan, right, the comedian, says sometimes he feels unqualified to be a parent, and he calls those times when he's awake, right? That's how oftentimes we feel, right? Every parent said, amen, or that's right, or whatever. So we started off last week talking about how we're gonna focus on 3 relationships in our children's lives, and we kind of had this little prop here with these different dials about those relationships, the child's relationship with parents, with God, and with others. So we want to talk about that. And listen, if you're not a parent, maybe your kids are grown, this is still great advice that maybe you could give others, or maybe when you're a grandparent. If you're a teenager, you don't have kids yet, chances are one day you will. So this is great stuff. So don't check out. And then one more week, and we'll move on. But listen, as parents, if you have children, right? So we have the ability to control some of their relationships, right? Some of them, we can't always control the decisions they make or the choices they make, unless, you lock them in the room and let them decide nothing. But relationships, we have a little influence over, at the very least, in their relational world. So today, as we talk about these different relationships, today we're going to talk about their relationship with God, right? How do we adjust? How do we move the God dial, the spiritual dial in their lives a little bit? And before we get there, let's all get on the same page, right? So that we're all kind of on common ground here. How many of you that are parents and your child, is at least 4 or 5 years old, how many of you have ever lost that child, right? Momentarily. Come on. Everyone that's a parent should have that story somewhere. I have, right? I totally did at Disney World. Whenever my girls were little, you did too, do not judge. My girls were little. We went to see the Mickey Mouse show, and it's like the show that's 3D, and at the end they shoot Donald Duck across the ceiling or building. And we came walking out after the show, and you know how they have those little covered areas, right, when you walk out of the show like that, or some of the rides where they're selling toys that are marked up like 1,000,000,000% because they know your kid's gonna cry and scream until you beg for mercy and tap out and spend ridiculous amounts of money. So we come out into that little covered area right there where all the toys are and all the shelves are, and it's been raining, right? It's Florida, it rains like 10 minutes off and on. So when it started raining while we're inside at the show, and so all these people that are out in the streets walking around had come crowding into that area to try to stay covered and stay dry for a few minutes. So it is packed, and then right as we come walking out, then the rain stops. And so everyone goes flooding back out from underneath that covered area out into the streets and off to the next attraction. Well, as we do, Maggie, she's like 5 at that time, Maggie gets caught up in this exodus of people leaving that area, and all of a sudden, like she's gone, like she has disappeared. So what do? Do I decide, 1, she's 6, right? Like practically an adult. She will figure it out and find her way back, right? Do I, 2, decide she needs to grow up and learn to be a little bit more responsible and pay attention to her surroundings? Or 3, who am I to interfere? God is sovereign. If he wants it, she will work her way back, all right? Anybody going with one of those? I did not, by the way, because my wife looked at me like, you should find her or you should not come back. So there was like that, for real, that initial rush of fear and angst as I run around like a madman trying to find her. Because again, 1, that's my little girl, right? She's my little princess. I'm supposed to love and protect and keep her safe always. And 2, because I can't afford another hotel room in Disney World if my wife locks me out, right? So boom, man, the search and the rescue mission is on. And literally maybe seconds, maybe a minute before I found her. She didn't get far, felt like an eternity for sure, but I did. And listen, if you're a parent, we all get this sense of urgency and even this sense of panic whenever we physically lose our children. So why don't we have that same sense of urgency sometimes, or passion or zeal for their spiritual life and their walk with God, right? Because if we believe, if you do and you're here, in a spiritual reality and hope for the eternity, then we should at least war and fight for their heart and for their walk with God. And have you ever considered this, where your kids are at spiritually, right? Is that something that you think about? So first question, where are my children spiritually? One of the, I think, weightiest things that Jesus says in the book of Matthew, he says this in verse 26, what do you benefit if you gain the whole world, get whatever you want, but then lose your own soul? Is anything more important than your soul? To which I hope, right, like your response to that question would be a very strong no. Nothing is more important. Nothing is more invaluable than your soul and its eternity. I also hope that as parents, you try to do things that stir your children's heart toward God, right, and stir your hearts and stir your neighbor's hearts, but specifically in context today, stir our kids' hearts. We would try to teach our kids to marvel at God when they were little, especially when they were really small, through very practical and very simple things. So like the girls would say, Daddy, we love pink. And I would be like, really? Do you know who made all the colors? Or they may say something like, giraffes are so cool. And I'd be like, I know, like how creative is God that he would put something together like that? Which, have you ever wondered if while putting together the giraffe, working on the head and the body, if God didn't get distracted by one of the angels, like Michael's like, hey, God, he's like, what? It's like, oh, that's different. Let's go with it. That's just where my mind goes, people. That was a good one, huh? I know. Hey, listen, I know, I know some of you try really hard and you work at stirring your kids' hearts towards God. But some of us may be losing our kids spiritually. And you may think, I would never, ever contribute to something like that. And listen, I fully understand, technically you can't lose their faith. But here's how you could contribute to that without actually even knowing it or realizing it. So sometimes we encourage, right? Whether literally or just through our time and action, like sports or academics or hobbies or entertainment, as the number one pursuit in our children's lives. And hear me say, I hope my kids, get into an Ivy League school or get a scholarship, academics, sports, they get drafted into the NBA or the NFL, whatever. Those things are all great. But if we are communicating that God takes a backseat now, right, to their Little League sports or to their high school academics, okay, well then you're increasing the odds that they will drop off the spiritual radar whenever they graduate, because we're kind of helping them build their little house on the sand and not on the rock, right? Back to our Sermon on the Mount series. And probably no one in here intends to put God on the back burner, but I think that very easily, right, can really become the byproduct of some of our enthusiasm or passion to see our kids succeed in certain areas. So we put a lot of time and a lot of effort, and I get this, and a lot of resources for our kids, investing in them in things that aren't necessarily going to help them be successful, healthy adults, and listen, and weather those storms, right? The rains came down, the floods came up, those storms that are for sure coming. And if you were here last week, we talked about, I'm all for our kids being experience rich, getting to do lots of things, but they need to be relationally rich too, with parents and with God and with others, which we'll talk about next week, to weather some of those things. So let's talk about a few things. I've got some questions, starting with this very important question right here. How do you, right, as parents, How do you personally view a relationship with God? Have you considered this? Because kids are like little parents, right? They will imitate whatever it is we're modeling. So let's start with us. And let's go with this. On a scale of 1 to 5, right? If you're just honest, on a scale of 1 to 5, kind of where would you rate your faith? So if 1 would be, number 1, doesn't matter, right? It's just really not all that important, not even really on your radar. Your spouse, your boyfriend, your girlfriend brings you here, but your mind, religion just messes things up. So it doesn't really matter. 2, faith is private, right? Whatever, it's between them and God. I have faith, I keep it to myself. If they find faith, cool, great for them. 3, it's a good thing, right? Kind of like eating vegetables. You don't necessarily enjoy it, but it's good for you, right? Kind of like the old idiom, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. A church service a month keeps you off the naughty list and keeps you in good karma, right? So it's a good thing. Maybe 3, relationship with God is, listen, it is a priority, right? Kind of priority over most things. Maybe it's priority over hobbies, priority over entertainment, maybe Xbox, some of these things. Maybe it's priority over academics. Maybe not so much sports, right? Like have you seen his throwing arm? Have you seen her set and spike? It's a thing of beauty, just trying to be a good steward of what God has given us. So kind of he's mostly priority. Or then number 5, relationship with God is the most important thing. And parents, listen, think about this. Here's reality. No one has more potential to move or influence where the God dial is in your child's life than you, right? You have so much influence. You have so much impact in their lives. I had a Bible college professor whenever I was in Bible college that talked about how the bigger the audience, right? The bigger the crowd, the smaller the influence. And then the smaller the crowd or the smaller your audience, the bigger the influence. So for instance, I have some influence with the hundreds, several hundreds, sometimes thousands of people that come here on the weekends, right? I have a little bit more influence even with the dozen or so people that sit around the table each week in our meetings and that are part of the Compass Roanoke team. But then I have by far, right, for sure, the most influence with the 4 people that live in my house just right across the highway over in Cleveland Gibbs. So dads, right? Your sons want to be like you, right? Your daughters want to marry someone like you. Moms, your daughters want to be like you. They want to marry, or your sons want to marry someone like you. You have so much influence, to which I would say, are you leveraging that in the right direction, personally and for them? And think about this. So in the New Testament writers, Paul and all his different letters and the gospel writers, they give lots of great wisdom and they give lots of great instructions for us and for life. And do you know what they have to say to the church about influencing and raising children? Nothing, right? At all. Because God intended for parents to play that role and to be the major influence in the lives of their children. And don't miss this. Listen, do not miss it, parents. You are for sure a spiritual influence in the lives of your kids. One way or another, right? They are learning to practice their faith from you. And think, that idea, like maybe it creates angst, right? Maybe it creates a little fear in some of you because God was used in like all the wrong ways on you as a child, right? So maybe you had the cosmic killjoy God that was used to make you behave, right? Maybe that's your background. Maybe that's what you came from. So the preacher or the Sunday school teacher or whoever told you that you better behave, or God was going to be mad, right? And you don't want to make God mad because you know what happens when God gets mad? People go to hell, right? So do you want to stop acting up and mind your parents, Johnny? Or would you like to take the elevator down? Up to you, right? Whatever, right? God says you can't dance, right? Because that's how people have babies outside of marriage, right? God says do your homework, right? God says you can only have 3 male friends, which is actually legit, and that's what I tell my girls. Come on, Will Ferrell, always good. You better watch out because listen, God's making a list and he is checking it twice. God is very, very disappointed with you right now. And listen, and the God dial gets turned, right? When you hear those things and it gets really turned in a very negative direction. Maybe this is the case. Maybe for some of you, you're nervous because your parents had no clue how to point you towards Jesus. And like you feel like you're in the exact same boat and you don't know what to do. You're like, I don't even know where to start. I don't know how to do that. Well, that's okay, right? We're here to help. We're here to offer resources. We're having the intentional parenting seminar coming up. We want to be an asset and a resource to you in that. Oh, I'll tell you what's even more crazy / scary to me is the person who knows that their parents did it in a way that was not helpful at all, but then you end up doing the very same thing because like that's all that you know, or maybe because you think that you're honoring your parents in some way by doing that. It's just monkey see, monkey do, even though you hated it, right? And they kind of for you turned the dial the wrong way for a long time, and now you're just following suit, right? So what do we do with that? Well, how do we course correct a little bit? 3 questions, right? 3 questions to help us kind of turn the spiritual dial because you really want to be aware of and kind of gauge how our kids are doing spiritually. So a few questions to ask. Number 1, what do I want my kids to become, right? I would say beyond career, beyond athlete, beyond whatever. I mean, spiritually and into eternity, what do you want them to become? I would say this. Start with the end in mind, right? Kind of think, so Molly and I, we went to a pastor's training a few years back, and they use this term reverse engineering, and it is exactly what it sounds like. So all it technically means is you envision what you want your life to look like, and this is a great practice for adults as well. Envision what you want your life to look like 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Well, what is it you want? And then you work your way back from there, and you start doing the things today that will lead to and create that preferred future or preferred outcome for them. And speaking of what we want our kids to become, let's look at this verse in Proverbs 3. That's what we read starting in verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all of your ways, submit to him, and he will make your paths straight, right? And that's a great verse. That's a great verse to read to your kids that they have no idea what it means to actually do that, right? It's a great verse. It's neat. It's tidy. It sounds fantastic. They don't know how to do it on their own. So we have to strive to model this for them. So with all of your heart, right? Come on. Kids can tell, right, what is going on in your heart. They know if you're sincere. They know if you're authentic and genuine. They know if you're divided, right? We read this in 1 Samuel 16, where it talks about people look at the outward, right? They see what's going on in the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Do you know who else is paying attention to what's going on in your heart? Your kids absolutely do. Is there any hypocrisy going on in there? Because they will sniff that out like a bloodhound, right? Like you are not fooling them. I remember a few years back listening to a pastor talk about this hypocrisy meter that children have, and they do, and not just about religion, right, but just about life in general. And I thought about that, and that is so completely true. So like when my kids were small, and they do this now still, but especially when they were little, like we'd be having dinner, and they would say, hey, Dad, why? And Dr. Pepper is like my drug of choice. I don't do coffee, but I do Dr. Pepper. Dad, why are you having a Dr. Pepper for dinner? Because I thought you said to us that that's not good for us, right? And that we could just have one a day. But we had Sprite for lunch, and you had a Dr. Pepper. But now you're having another one, and we're just drinking water. Is it not good for you too? I'm like, you little brats. Yes, good point. Hey, time for bed, head upstairs to your room, it's time, you're 10-minute tidy, clean up your room, get everything picked up before you go to bed. And they're like, oh, well, okay, that's great. We're just wondering who's going to pick up your room, right? Because we were just in there talking to Mom, and we noticed your books are everywhere and your sweaty workout clothes are on the floor. Like if they get it, right? Like they know, man. And if there is a disconnect, right, some type of hypocrisy between what you're teaching, what you're saying, what they're learning at church, and what you are living out, they will get that, man. Like if they can figure out soft drinks and dirty clothes, they are going trying to get worship in the heart of God. So are you, right, in your walk, trusting God with all of your heart? Then he goes on and says, and lean not on your own understanding. This is going and asking God for wisdom, right? Godly thoughts that come from him. Can your kids find answers about God and Jesus and the way of Jesus from you? Or do you know how to help them find that together, right? You're trying to figure out, I don't know the answer, but here's where we can get it. Submit, right? He says you have to learn to submit to him, which means you're willing to graciously and to humbly, faithfully allow some things that would go God's way and not yours, and even rejoice in that. So a while back, Molly and I, we were praying and we were fasting over a really significant decision and something that we were looking into, and we let our kids know that we were doing that. And then it absolutely did not go the way that we had hoped or had been praying for. And what did we do? We worship God, right? Because we want them to know, we trust that God is a good dad and that we believe he's got really the best in store for us, even if we don't see it, understand it, or it's not even the way that we want it to go. So submit. And then finally says, and make your paths straight. Which, listen, we are all fallen people trying to draw a straight path with a crooked stick, right? Which is why we need to keep leaning into God and letting him make our paths straight. So are you creating opportunities to make it really easy for your kids to connect to God at your house? And we're, speaking of this dial, man, we're in this really interesting season right now at our house where my oldest is now, she's going to graduate this year. So she's finishing a year early, and I don't like that, but I guess I don't have a choice. So she's graduating this year. My middle daughter is a freshman, and my son, he's in grade school. And so more and more, right now at this stage, I'm seeing what they are becoming. And even with their weaknesses and their shortcomings, because we've all got them, and my kids have those as well. But like, I really, really like what it is that they are becoming. And again, this is interesting season for me to be in, and that I'm walking through right now, because I'm vision guy, big dreamer, have all these things that I would really like to accomplish. But I find myself more and more dreaming about what it is they could become. Right, you get this, and not trying to force them into my vision or shape them into what I want them to become, in the sense that I'm trying to relive my glory years. Not that, but pouring into and propelling who God is creating them to become. And I would say this. If you don't like the direction that maybe your kids are going or some of the decisions they're making, and I know this is complicated and hard, but you still start turning dials, right? Try to start moving some of the dials. Try to figure out where can I, maybe it's just a small degree, half a degree, where can I shift it? And ultimately, again, hear me, you can't control your child's future, but you can fight for it and influence it, absolutely. Culture, social media, Hollywood, entertainment, music, government. Listen, they are all working really, really hard to try and shape your child. You should too. We read this in 3 John, verse 4. I could have no greater joy than to hear that my children are following the truth, right? That is a great joy for your heart. And modeling it, right? Modeling it is one of the most powerful tools that we have, which we'll hit more on that in a second. But let me get to our second question. Question number 2, where are my kids right now, right? So where are they, would you say, in their relationship with God at this moment? And every phase, every stage, every season is critical. And think about this, kind of the different stages of development that your kids go through just physically as they grow up. So we've broken these down in 3 categories. So year 0, from the time they're born, to about year 4, that's the discovery stage, right? That's a fun stage, whether you're a parent or if you're a grandparent, you're going through it again. That's so much fun when they're figuring out their toes and they can put them in their mouth and like they start learning they can make noises with their mouth, and that's funny. They learn to talk and walk and then become like you and parrot you. The discovery stage, that is a blast. And I know there's terrible twos in there and there's some hard seasons, but that's a lot of fun. Next stage, 5 to 8, that's kind of the testing years where they're asking, why to everything, right? Why? Why do birds have wings? Why is the sun orange? Why do you have nose hair? Why, right? Why? Right, lots of the why questions. And then after that, 9 to 12, that's kind of the concluding years. Right? And I've got a son right in this age where like they think they know some stuff, where he'll even ask me questions, and I'll give him an answer. He's like, that's not right, Dad, it's this. I'm like, why'd you even ask me then if you already know the answer? So concluding stage, and you get this. And listen, during that stage, discipline or correction, helping them become godly men and godly women, it is so crucial. That's kind of the size and authority stage, right? From like 0 to 12, where you're bigger, you know a lot more, and you really can shape them. Because beyond that, it's a lot harder to use size and authority. You really have to have some relational equity and quality of relationship to speak into their life effectively beyond that. And we'll talk about that some next week. But so some of you, maybe you struggle in the discipline correction stage because I would say this is selfish, because you would rather them like you in a moment than maybe say some hard words to prepare them to live and lead well for a lifetime. We read this in Proverbs 19:18. Discipline your child while there is hope. Otherwise, you will ruin their lives. Right? Correction is so beneficial if you want to do it well and in a healthy way. So that's kind of the first stage, the first set. Then we move to the next stage, right? Which typically starts around the time of puberty, which for me and for most guys, that's like when your head and your feet are disproportionate to the rest of your body. Your voice becomes schizophrenic, right? Where it's not sure if it wants to be an adult man or a preteen girl, right? Or a preschool girl, I don't know. Hair starts to grow on your body randomly and in spurts, right? So like you've got one armpit that looks like a bowling ball and the other looks like Chewbacca. It's just weird. Unless you're the guy that got like the extra testosterone where you're like shaving twice a day at the age of 15, you look like a chia pet and you have to keep shaving, whatever. So then you kind of go through the same stages, right, as you did for the first 12 years. So watch this and tell me if this is not true. 13 to 14, you're back in the discovery stage. Like, oh, what is that? That's weird. That's different. What's going on? Then 15 to 17, again, why? Why do I have to come home at this time? Why this? Why? And then 18 and beyond, you're back in the concluding years. You don't know. That's what they did in your day, Mom and Dad. You're so old and you're so outdated, until they hit about 30 and start having their own kids. They're like, oh my goodness, just tell me what to do, right? So that's coming as well. So that is kind of the progression physically in our kids' lives, in our lives. Okay, when you go through the same stages spiritually, right? The same thing happens on a spiritual level. And you have to be honest and honestly assess kind of where they're at. Discovery, testing, concluding, where are they at? And then take it from there. And maybe you wonder, okay, well, when should I start, getting busy turning the dials in my kid's life? Right? Like now, right? Wherever they're on the spectrum, today, you start turning dials. Right? Like, if the doctor called and said they have a health concern about your child, you wouldn't wait till a better date or a later time to do something about it. You would start to move. And here again, I'm the pastor, and I absolutely believe that you cannot force your kids spiritually into a relationship with God. Like you can't, but you fight for it, and you strive to shape them and influence them, and you start turning dials. With wisdom and with patience and with hope, maybe even with desperation. And you start stirring their hearts towards God. And then third and final question that we'll talk about today, how can I help them take the next step, right? How do I help them take that step? So a couple thoughts for you. For some of you in the room, right? Maybe this is you, and maybe the way you begin to turn the dial is as simple as this. You take your first step, right? Think about this. They can't make the next step until you take the first step. To which I would just say, are you following God? And are you living your life in the way of Jesus? It is so much easier for your kids to love Jesus if you really, really love Jesus, right? If you're chasing after him, delighting in him, living like his joy is something real in your life. Craig Rochelle is the lead pastor, and he does leadership podcasts, and he always signs off on his podcast by saying, people would rather follow a leader who is always real than one who is always right. And I would say that about parenting, man. If your relationship with God is real, that carries so much more weight than if you're just saying right words with no action really behind that. So I think it's your kid will make their next step spiritually so much better. They'll be able to do that well if you take your first step. If you've never done that, we would encourage you to do that today. And then listen, and then you just model it, man. You just look for ways to live that out. Oh, and let me say this. If this is new to you, right, building a godly family, that doesn't happen overnight, right? It's going to take some work. So for instance, if you've had 10 years of anarchy and chaos and rebellion in your home, that doesn't change in 10 minutes, right? It doesn't change maybe in 10 days or in 10 months maybe. But it for sure will not happen until you take your first step or your next step. And then each step, right, that you take gets you a little bit closer to this preferred outcome and preferred future. And it may be hard and it may feel like a strain, but you start taking steps. We read this in Matthew 6, seek first his kingdom and then his righteousness, and then all these things will be given to you as well. So you take your step, and then again, we model it, right? We look for ways to show them what faith looks like. We read this in Proverbs 20, the godly walk with integrity. Blessed are their children who follow them, right? Which just means you show them how. You help navigate them to Jesus. Be active. Listen, be active in your faith with them. Psalm 22:30, we read this, our children will also serve him. Future generations will hear about the wonders of the Lord. His righteous acts will be told to those not yet born. They will hear about everything that he has done. This is such an awesome verse because here's what it means. It means that this is the byproduct of you just simply loving Jesus, that you create fertile soil for the likelihood of future generations to love him also. So for your kids and then your grandkids and your great-grandkids, right? You are creating soil for that to likely happen. So I'll close and I'll say this. When your kids are young, especially if you still have young kids, and you have young kids, if your kids are young, when they're young, and then as they grow up, right, and get older, have fun. Again, don't make it like eating vegetables, like, this is going to be miserable, but you need it and it's good for you. We're like, oh, okay, Daddy, that sounds awesome. No, make it fun, right? Learn to engage with them in ways that it's a good time. So whenever my girls were really small, we would read the Bible a lot, right? I had one of those children's Bibles, picture Bibles, story Bibles. We would read the Bible, and then usually once a week, every other week, we would do what we just called Bible night, right? Bible night. And I would narrate for them one of the stories and then have them go to their playroom and find props, toys, stuffed animals, whatever it is, that they would then bring in and act out the story as I would read it to them. And so this was really funny, especially when I just had the two girls, because, all they have is like Barbie dolls and Disney princess figures and stuff like that. So like we're doing David and Goliath, right? So, okay, we're going to do David and Goliath. I tell the girls, I said, okay, I need God's army, right? I need the Israelites. I need the Philistines. I need the bad guys. I need that army. I need King Saul, I need David, and then I need Goliath. And so they'd be like, all right, Daddy, and they would run off to their playroom, and then, of course, to get the props. And again, all they have are these dolls and princess figures, so they come back and, like, Sleeping Beauty is David, and like Ariel or Pocahontas, someone is King David or King Saul. And then, like they had this weird-looking, crazy-looking giant frog, and so that became Goliath. And so they're like, all right, it's Sleeping Beauty versus the giant frog. All right, so this is our setup. Then I would tell them, and I need a sling. I need 5 smooth stones. Back to your playroom. Go and find the pieces. Bring them. They would go grab all the props, bring them back over. Then I would start reading, and they would put the players and the pieces into play, and we would have a blast. And listen, it was fun. To which I would say, enjoy God with them. Teach them to enjoy God, and it makes it so much easier to motivate them to want to learn about Him. So I cultivate that, right? Enjoy with them, and then as they get older, just continue to nurture that. So like even today, man, I've got a couple teens now. We have a night a week. We'll grab a guitar, sing some songs, go on the YouTube or somewhere, watch a message from a communicator they really like, besides for me, and then talk about that. And you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be an expert at all. You just have to be willing to engage and try to lead by example and through your relationship with God. And we spend all kinds of time on social media, working on the house, working on the project, working on the car, working on our golf swing, going to the mall, going to the gym, going to whatever it is. Why not investing in God's words and our kids and their future? And again, if you don't feel like you can do that well then maybe you could learn to do it together with them. It might be fun. So I want to encourage you. What is it? What is your next step you need to take? What is it you need to do to move the dial? Do you need to sign up for the parenting seminar? Do you just need to give your life to Christ? What are you doing to fight for their future? It is absolutely the greatest investment you will make. Wherever they're at on the spectrum, man, if you have babies or they are grown with their own kids, you can still move dials because you are their parent. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you're such a good God, that you identify yourself as our Heavenly Father, just to let us know the importance of raising kids in the next generation and your value, and that you would love us desperately and faithfully and relentlessly through all of our mistakes, and that you still want us even when we're broken. I pray we would find a way to communicate the same things to our kids, wherever that is, wherever they're at. God, I do pray for our kids, if they're just small babies right now, grade school, high school, well beyond that, for their hearts to be turned towards you. And if they're far from you right now, God, I pray you would start stirring, the Holy Spirit would woo and pursue them, and you would help us turn some dials to create fertile soil. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for pursuing us. God, I pray that your Spirit would break through in these things. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.